Good evening, folks. This is Andy Pedraza with Special Effects Academy. We are on the start of the week session in the Forex trading room for March 21st of 2021. We will be going through our regular agenda, and that will be a look at the prior week's results, our currency strength meter for the week, fundamental announcements on the calendar, a look at the major pairs on the daily charts, any setups we see in progress, and a few words in conclusion. Starting with the ledgers, long-term ledger, we had a nice bit of recovery, about 6% up from last week. We still have trades open. Some of them were negative on Friday, and we did enter earlier today a short on the USD CAD, which is currently at break even. We're doing this session later than usual, so I had a couple of things I needed to take care of today, but well, that gives us the advantage of seeing how the market has been behaving in the past couple of hours. So only new thing to report is that we did open that USD CAD short, which is not shown here on the ledger, simply because I have not updated it yet. It will be sent out in the next update to go out. On the intermediate, pretty much the same, no significant change. It was pretty flat week. Same goes for the short-term account. We still have the same trade open, a long on the Euro Swiss. So in essence, a very, very flat week, except on the long term where we did take some profit off the table, which we had already been carrying amid some of the retraces that we saw happening earlier in the week. Notes and opportunities for improvement. As mentioned, some profit taken essentially on the long-term account and a lot of consolidation out of the market. Relative strength meter, we can see that the bigger mover was the yen. It did stage a little bit of a recovery, not as much. It was a flat week, so this big bar on the yen really doesn't reflect a significant movement. It's just that the market was so flat that a little bit of a retrace on the yen does look very significant. We can see that the Kiwi, the CAD, and the Aussie were almost perfectly flat. We had a little bit of strength coming out of the dollar, some weakness out of the euro and the pound, and the Swiss, a little bit of strength, but not a whole lot. Fundamental announcements for the week. We have the ILO unemployment rate quarterly coming out of the tomorrow night into Tuesday morning. We have also the Swiss National Bank's interest rate decision very early on Thursday morning. So we will be trading those two events live. With that, we move into our charts. Commodities, oil had a bit of a dip towards the end of the week. It was showing some recovery on Friday, but not enough to bring it back up. However, it is at a much higher point than any time in the last few months. It retraced back to about $60 a barrel coming off of a recent high of 65. So $5 dip, not the biggest mover, and indeed, it's still a very, very bullish. With that, we move into the currencies, and as I mentioned, we're going to see that the week was definitely one of consolidation with most of the pairs moving flat. The euro dollar had a range of, I'm going to say, less than 100 pips up and down, and ultimately didn't do much. Same can be said for the pound dollar. It is still a very, very bullish chart. So we can see that it's following a trend line all the way up, but its most significant high was up around 142.25, and that happened quite a few weeks back. Since then, it has been trending sideways, slightly lower, about 400 pips lower than where it peaked. It's still going up, however, so have to be very cautious with it. This could be a simple breather out of the market, or it could be the beginning of a retracement. We'll have to wait and see if it does break support. So far, it hasn't. USDJPY also taking a breather very near the top of the chart. And again, more sideways than anything else, though we did see a very slow decline most of the week. USD Canadian dropping all week through Wednesday, then Thursday into Friday. It did a bit of a retrace, undoing most of the drop from earlier in the week and ending very flat, but still well below resistance. USD Swiss, same thing. It had been dropping for a few weeks. Thursday into Friday, it did go up again, finding resistance, but ultimately a very flat consolidating chart. Aussie dollar, same thing, sideways pattern. Kiwi dollar, sideways pattern. You guys are seeing the pattern here. Aussie CAD, the Canadian was one of the currencies that moved a little bit better, especially towards the beginning of the week. But the Aussie CAD did find support and then bounced a little bit higher, not coming all the way back up, but still it is well above support. You can see the gap there. So very interesting to see how the week is going to kick off on the Canadian pairs, seeing that they were moving quite nicely until the very end of the week. Euro Swiss, a bit of a wider range, but still ultimately sideways and right below the top. Euro pound all the way at the bottom at support and also moving sideways for the better part of the week. We can see that it has been trying to go up, but it is really failing to find any traction. On the positive side here, support does seem to be holding. So this is still a very valid long contrarian, of course, retracement position, but it looks like support is going to be holding. It moved about as much as it's going to move unless something else happens. Euro JPY flat all the way at the top, breaking the topmost level of resistance, but ending the week slightly below. Euro Canadian, same thing, but opposite. It is at the bottommost level, finding support and ending the week almost perfectly flat, though it did move quite nicely in both directions throughout the week. Pound JPY at the top, sideways, waiting for the next movement, up or down. Aussie JPY at the top, sideways. Euro New Zealand also very, very sideways. So this one has a much larger range, even when it's moving sideways. So you got to be careful with the Euro New Zealand. Pound Canadian, and here we see a little bit of the CAD movement plus some of the pound weakness that came into the market at some point, and not a big weakness, but still it did do a retrace. But it was a very bouncy pair. The Pound Canadian really moved. Most of the movement was late last week, but it did try to go in both directions, ultimately ending, as I said, sideways, as did most of the other pairs. Pound Swiss all the way at the top, sideways. And pound Aussie, though it did move in both directions quite sharply, ended the week almost perfectly flat. That is the end of our chart setups we see in progress. And again, we have to take into account that most, if not all, of these currencies were consolidating throughout the week relative to each other. But the pound does continue at 3-year highs and is holding. The USD pairs, of course, going sideways, but ultimately I still see dollar weakness in the outlook. The Australian pairs, they're struggling to maintain strength. They're still very much at the top. But as with some of the other currencies, I have to ask myself if the bigger movement, this long running trend, is starting to play out. The Japanese, of course, has been weak for quite a long time, uncharacteristically and for no good reason, but it has been weakening steadily. It did have a small rally last week. And the Canadian pairs, Canadian continues moving very bullishly, but in fits and starts. And I'm going to say that I'm not going to call it a collapse, but the retracement in oil towards the end of the week did affect the Canadian as well. So not much to see here, not much to say. Again, it's consolidation, and we have to wait for the market to start moving again in either direction. And that's the end of the presentation. And my final words here, as you can imagine, consolidation has been heavily on my mind. And no matter how big or strong a move, the market is often going to pause and take a breather. You're going to see sideways movement almost across the board in these market conditions, and even some retracing, but you have to be very careful. Beginners often think this signals a trend reversal, and then they get hit hard when the market continues after this pause, or alternately, it does reverse. but some people think it's going to continue and they had already placed money in that direction. Therefore, when you see consolidation, a sideways market, it always pays to lose part of the bigger move just to get confirmation in which direction it's going to be moving. Of course, again, you're going to be losing part of that move. Often the big profits are going to come to those who take the bigger risk. But remember, when you take big risk, eventually they're going to work against you. So take that with a grain of sand. It's different trading styles, and sometimes you can have separate accounts with different risk profiles, and you can take those bigger risks on the smaller accounts, looking for those big wins. Where if you have a bigger loss, it really doesn't matter. It was a small account to begin with. You're going to have to trade at some point. You can't just sit on the sidelines and watch the market doing stuff. At some point, you're going to have to put money on the table, but you do have the alternative here of doing it in a safer or riskier fashion, depending on what you're looking for. And that's going to be it for me this week for our start of the week. Any comments or questions from anyone? Okay, and thank you very much. I'll be sending the update and the recording out very shortly. Check your calendars there for any changes throughout the week. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of a weekend.